Hey everyone, and welcome back to Build UX. In this episode, we're going to create some avatar components and then finish out the header design in our app with layout grids and theming. Where we left off in the last episode was we created some design atoms that we'll need for a header, including the notification dots that you see here. We also have all of our search inputs and their various states that we'll need. So if we look at the reference pages here, we can see what's remaining to build out the rest of this header layout. So our icon system was already established. We'll reuse these notification dots from the components we added in our atoms section. And so we need to create avatar components for both the large and small variations that we see throughout our design. So to kick things off, let's deep select using controller command and clicking on an avatar. And here we can directly copy one of our earlier drafts of the large avatar that we see here for the sender name. So I'm just going to copy this and let's go into our atoms page. Let's paste in this large avatar variation. Going back to our pages, let's deep select this smaller variation of the avatar used for our recipient list. We'll copy this and paste it in our atoms page as well. Now I'm immediately seeing an area for opportunity with the small variation of our avatar component. I'd like everything to fall on an 8-pixel grid. So right now we have 26 by 26. So I'm going to constrain the width and height proportions. And let's bump this down to be 24 by 24. I think I like the border radius where it is at 10 pixels. So we'll leave that alone for now. Now for this larger avatar, 48 by 48 is perfect for our needs. I think the only thing we'll want to do is make sure that these borders are set to be on the inside and also use our color palette accordingly. So instead of having this hard-coded hex value, let's go find our component guide swatches, and we'll want to use the component guide for the dark theme on both of these. On this small avatar, let's make sure this is also set to have the border on the inside, just to mimic border box sizing when it comes time to code this out in CSS. All right, and since these are pretty straightforward components, these gray fills are just going to be placeholders until we bring in dedicated images for our final design. So what we can do from here is let's get these layers arranged. And I'd like to batch rename both of these. Let's just name both of these avatar with dark as the variation. And then rearranging our small variation to come after the first. We can go up to the first one and hit Control or Command R to rename. And let's append the large sizing to this name. Lastly, on the small variation, we'll append /small to that naming. And then using Control Command plus Alt or Option and K, we can componentize both the large and small variations of this component. Next up, I'm just going to draw a frame around these. And let's rename this frame to be avatars/dark. And let's apply the main background color for the dark theme. Lastly, let's just get the spacing between our components cleaned up here, as always, to keep our design files nice and tidy. And get equal spacing with our frame around these components. All right, so that's pretty much it for the dark variation. This is going to go pretty quickly to retheme these for the light theme. So first things first, let's bump this layer down one and rename it immediately for avatars with the light theme. Now digging into each of these, all we have to really do is apply some color overrides and recomponentize each of these variations. So we're just going to switch component guide dark to component guide for the light theme. Let's make sure that the main background color of the frame is also for the light theme. And do the same for our small variation. All right, and then we can componentize each of these. Again, Control or Command plus Alt or Option and K to componentize. And simply replace the word dark with light as needed for each of these new variations. All right, and it's kind of hard to see where that border comes into play. So for the light variations, I think what I'll do is just override the fill for this placeholder or the plate of the avatar with something just a little bit lighter. So let's try like E9, E9, E9 on each of these. All right, that makes it much easier to discern the separate elements here. Again, these gray plates will be filled with an image once we finalize this design. And with these taken care of, I think we're ready to turn our attention to building out the organisms for the header components. So in order to establish the plate or the background of this header, let's go into our reference design and take a quick measurement of what we'll need. So our sidebar component is 320 pixels wide, and our reference design is 1600 wide. Now inspecting our reference here, we know we want a small space between these layout areas. I believe this is only 4 pixels wide. So using our calculator real quick, we're going to do 1600 minus the 4 pixel gap between the components minus the 320 pixels that we need for our sidebar component. And this means that for this particular viewport, we want to fill the remaining space of 1276 pixels wide. So in our organisms page here, let's drag out a rectangle that matches that dimension. So 1276 wide. And thinking through, if we reference our particles real quick, what height we want here, I think 96 pixels will be a good close match to a reference design that also falls along our spacing scale. So just to check, let's select our existing header component design. This was at 104, so I think 96 should serve us well. So for the height, we'll set that to be 96 tall. And then we'll want to be sure to apply the component background for the dark theme. So I'm going to rename this to be the header plate. And now comes the fun part where we basically get to drop in a bunch of our existing components to quickly create this more complex parent component. So using Alt or Option 2, let's go over to our Assets panel here. And the first thing we want is our search input for the dark theme. So I'm going to find this default state with the placeholder text, drop that into place. Next up, if we look at our reference design, we're going to need the folder icon, bell icon, and the envelope icon with the small notification dot, and then our large avatar and some text. So finishing out these subcomponents, again, using Alt or Option 2, let's go into the Assets tab and start going for our icon buttons. So we'll drag in an initial instance here. We can duplicate that as needed. But while we're here, let's grab those notification dots. So I think we just want the small variation, drag one of those in. And lastly, the large avatar. All right, so I'm going to quickly get our layers arranged in order of appearance. And as I mentioned, we'll want to swap out the instance of this icon button for the specific icons that we're looking for. So first off, if we go into the nested component, we can change the instance from search to folder. Let's duplicate this over. This second one, instead of folder, we want bell. And duplicating one more time, this third icon will be the envelope. Now for each of these, I also want to update the fills of these. So we might have to drill down into some layers to get to the actual icon path. And let's set this to be our medium contrast for the dark theme. I'm going to do the same for the icon bell and our envelope as well. All right, so that's looking pretty good. Obviously, we need to clean up our layout here since everything is just a little bit chaotic and thrown in place. But to help establish that, I think we want to componentize things at this stage and immediately apply a layout grid. So I'm going to select all of these layers. And again, hitting Control or Command plus Alt or Option and K. Let's componentize this whole thing and call it the header for the dark theme. Now in the side panel here, we can apply an initial layout grid. So let's pop this open. And in the options menu, we're going to use a column. We're only going to have one column since we want to establish the left and right padding within the header plate. For the color, let's go looking for that local color that we use for our layout grids. The type will remain stretch. We're going to want 64 pixels of padding on the left and right and 0 gutter, so that way we just get a nice line indication on the left and right sides. So with that, we can grab our search input, slide it over so it matches that layout guide exactly. And let's set its constraints to be pinned to the left and the vertical center. All right, going over to the right side of things, we're going to have to kind of work backwards here. We need to get the user profile text in place if we reference our original design here. And we'll use this to space our items from the right edge over to the left. So previously we created our type specs in the particles page. So let's reference those and see what would be the closest match here. So we can see our font sizes and line heights conveniently as part of our type specs. Referencing our design one last time, let's do a deep selection with Control or Command and click. And it looks like we already have Title 3 applied directly to this mockup. So we know that's what we're going to want to use here. So in the organisms page, we'll type out Charlie Grant, Title 3. This will be the high contrast for the fill, if we get that applied. And let's double click the corner of this so that the text frame auto sizes. Getting this vertically centered, we'll want to add constraints. And I think this will be to the right and center. Let's rename this to be the profile and the username, so we have a little more context around what's going on here. And I think we'll want to group both the avatar and username in a group that we'll just call header profile. All right, so let's make sure the avatar is also vertically centered within our design. And thinking with our common spacing values, let's get these to have a 16 pixel gap between the two. So with this group, we know we want this to be constrained to the right in vertical center. That's looking good. And now let's turn our attention to this action menu of sorts over here. So I'm going to first group these icons and let's rename this to header actions. We forgot to bring our notification dot into there. So let's drag that into place as well. And this notification dot is going to be tied directly to this envelope icon. So we know we'll want that to appear above it. Let's zoom in here real quick and just get it positioned so it meets the top right corner of the icon itself. And we can group these two together and simply call it unread messages as sort of the notification within this panel. All right, so with these three elements now, we can center align them. Let's also distribute the horizontal spacing between them. And I think I want them pretty close together since we have a generous tap target size. So let's bring this down to 8 pixel gap between the three of the icon buttons that we have here. Lastly, we want this group to be vertically centered within our header. And let's establish the margin between these elements. So zooming out, we could do 64 pixels of spacing here. But that looks like a little too much to my eye. So let's grab this header actions group. Let's bring that down to 32, I think, for now. All right, now taking a look at what we have here, this is pretty much it for our header component. So we can collapse these layers down and drag out another instance for the light theme. So opening these layers up, let's swap out the component background for the light theme. Our search input, we have the dark default version. So we'll go to search inputs light, search input, and we'll want the default version there. Header actions, we have our default icon button for the dark theme. Let's switch that over to the light theme. And within this, we can swap out again that icon for the folder icon that we're looking for. While we're here, let's adjust the fill of that icon to be medium contrast for the white theme. And we'll want to repeat that process for our other two icon buttons here. All right, so with those fills all adjusted, I also swapped out the notification dot for the light variation, just so we got that more subtle box shadow as needed. And we can move on to the final elements of our header here. Grabbing the avatar, let's swap this over to the white variation for the large size. And lastly, the profile username will be high contrast for the dark theme. Zooming out here, we're ready to componentize this light variation. And let's rename it to reflect the new theme. All right, so we can put a frame around these now. Let's call this headers. Make sure it is the last group in our layers panel. And get our spacing cleaned up as always. One thing I just realized is we actually need our envelope icon here instead of that search icon. So let me make sure that gets in place as well. And if I remember correctly, we actually wanted this notification state for the light theme to also take on the accent color for the actual icon fill. So let's drill down into the layers, grab that, and let's go find our accent default color. All right, that's looking much more prominent. We have a lot more affordance for that notification. And with those all in place, I think that takes care of all of the final work for our header component. So last thing to do, let's go into our pages here. This is in the refinement section, and we're just going to delete this draft header completely, holding Alt or Option 2. Let's go into our assets panel, organisms, drag in a dark header, and let's make sure this gets positioned as needed. So we only want 4 pixels between the sidebar and this component. And if we scroll over to the right, you can see it matches that right edge perfectly. So obviously the widths of the inbox and the message detail panes, as well as their heights, will get finalized as we build out these component areas. But for now, we're well on our way to finalizing another big portion of this UI. So while we have the assets panel open, let's drag in the light variation. Going back to our layers tab, we can open up our light variation of the refinement, drag this into place, delete our draft header, and make sure this snaps into the top right corner. One last thing I just realized is we can also set the constraints. So let's set it to be pinned to the left and right and pinned to the top of the screen. Scrolling back over to our dark theme mockup, let's do the same for this header here. And that way, if we ever want to adjust the viewport, everything should respond accordingly. Let's actually give this a quick test. We'll drag out an instance of our working design so far. And we can start dragging things around and seeing how they behave. So it looks like the only thing I forgot to do was actually set constraints on this action menu. Looks like those are being pinned to the left when they should be pinned to the right. So let's adjust that real quick in our organisms. So header actions, again, is set to scale. We want that to be pinned to the right and the center. And if we go back to our Pages tab now, everything is actually pretty fluid. So when working in Figma, a lot of times people are wondering how we kind of figure out responsive design. And the best answer I have for that is to think through your constraints for general breakpoints, and you can actually adjust your mockups pretty fluidly to get a pretty good idea of how all of these things should behave. Obviously, there's a lot more complexity when we get into a lot more robust UI like this message detail pane, but you can see that some of our simpler components can adapt pretty fluidly to different viewport sizes. All right, so let's delete this working layer for now. and collapse down our layers. I'm going to zoom to fit with Shift and 1. And I think this is a great place to stop for this episode. In the next episode, we'll follow a similar process of diving into our inbox section by starting to componentize the more granular elements within that layout area, such as each message within the message list. So thank you so much for watching, and be sure to check out the next episode.